Joining us for more is Dr. DAHLIA, a political strategist who has worked extensively in the Balkans, including Serbia and Kosovo. She joins us from Tel Aviv. DAHLIA, it was described in the report this was a surprise announcement. I think people were many people taken by surprise. Explain to us some of the political motivations at play here, especially with Kosovo. That really seems unusual.
Well, it is a surprise, and a surprise to many of us analysts and people who follow the region, because theoretically these things should not have been tied together. Serbia and Kosovo were hosted by the White House alongside a process of dialogue taking place hosted by the EU. These regions tend to be very, very separate from anything to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What I can say is that the link seems to be Trump, because Trump, clearly wanted to have foreign policy achievements ahead of the elections. He helped broker the UAE agreement with Israel. He then hosted this dialogue in the White House, but the Israel part of it was definitely a twist. So we can't say exactly whose idea it was or how it came to be. What we can do, however, is look at the results, the implications or the ramifications, if you will, and that may give us a sense of the motivations. Israel certainly gets out of it, as your reporter pointed out, 2 new countries or entities, depending on which side of the Kosovo divide you fall out on, who now recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. On the Kosovar side of it, there's a clear win because Israel recognizes Kosovo. That is not to be taken for granted after years of Serbian campaign for de-recognition of Kosovo. The U.S., Trump gets a foreign policy win out of it. It looks like he's brokered a breakthrough, even though many people are cautious about what this really means for Kosovo and Serbia. It's not totally clear what Serbia gets out of the deal, other than being in good company with Israel and the U.S., but Serbia has to move its embassy to Jerusalem, which maybe isn't a big compromise, but also has to swallow the recognition by Israel of Kosovo, certainly not something that Serbia wants. It's not clear yet, I think, to anybody what Serbia is getting in return.
Right. Let's talk about that Israeli recognition of Kosovo, because over the years there have been some comparisons made between, you mentioned Serbian opposition, but also comparisons made to Kosovo and perhaps recognizing a Palestinian state. Again, this is a Muslim nation, largely Muslim nation, sort of carved out of the largely Christian former Yugoslavia. And on that, just on that basis, it's unusual that Israel then has made this big step suddenly to recognize Kosovo.
It is unusual. I think for a long time, Israel did not want to take the risk of setting a precedent for recognizing regions that are considered breakaway secessionist regions or unrecognized entities, liberation struggles, put it how you will. They didn't want the sense of an international precedent that would then cause other countries or international figures to say, why aren't you recognizing the Palestinians? That seems to have taken second place to Netanyahu's interest in having another foreign policy win, specifically with, as you put it, and this is a very interesting twist, a Muslim majority country. The Israeli government is not being nearly so nuanced. They are calling Kosovo a Muslim country, a Muslim state. It's very strange considering Kosovo's background. For decades, Kosovo was struggling to be accepted within the family of independent sovereign states within Europe, asserting itself as having a European identity and a civic national identity, a multi-ethnic identity. It is majority Albanian. There is a range of levels of practice of Islam. There are also Catholics, but certainly it's majority Muslim. But the country does not define itself as a Muslim state as such. And to that end, it's quite interesting to see how Israel is certainly positioning this as a victory for a Muslim state, as if to suggest that there should have been hostility, when in fact, I don't think there ever was any particular hostility. In fact, Kosovars are quite proud of having worked to help save Jews during the Second World War. There was never any historic enmity to begin with.
Right. Bottom line, though, certainly a diplomatic win for Israel in getting 2 European nations to move their embassies, or to agree to move their embassies to Jerusalem. Dr. DAHLIA,
if it actually happens.
If it happens.
You should qualify that.
Okay, if it happens. DAHLIA, thank you for joining us on The Rundown.